Yeah, used to be
How I
engineer.
feel like
What happened to you?
Sadly, like my Kiswahili yeah, I did. I studied in engineering terms. Although I started quite late, engineering degree. I studied renewable energies and appropriate technology for my degree at the University of Warwick in the UK. A degree that used to exist. I don't think it really exists any longer, but it was called Engineering Design and Appropriate Technology, based around mechanical engineering. And one of the reasons I was attracted to that degree, apart from it being appropriate technology, was that you could get to work in Africa for a year during the degree, which I took with that opportunity. I worked in Botswana at a place which I think, again, no longer exists, which is the Rural Industries Innovation Centre, which was in Kandy, in southern Botswana. So that was, after my between the second and third year of my degree, I got to work there, which was, I would say, very formative for me. I worked at the level of a technician in a workshop in Rick, and I really got to see, although Botswana, sort of technical capabilities sense, was actually doing quite well. And actually many of the technicians around me had done degrees, engineering degrees in the UK, and had actually very good skills and knowledge. There were still, a lot of very serious practical constraints. So that was a very useful experience. But then eventually, after my degree, I then got a job in Tanzania working on a solar PV project at the end of the 90s. And I was there for 3 years, 97 to 2000, working with the Maasai organization, trying to get solar PV to be more affordable, more accessible. And it was a period, if you know anything about solar PV markets in East Africa, or Kenya and Tanzania in particular, at that time, the end of the 90s in Tanzania, there was almost nothing happening in solar PV. So it was quite a struggle, but things were happening in Kenya, and we were trying to copy that, and it didn't seem to be going very anywhere. Anyway, we did some things. But then I went back to the UK at the end of 2000, and eventually, through a long, circuitous route, did a master's at the place I'm based in still, SPRU, Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. Did a master's and PhD. And with the PhD I came back to East Africa to look at how the evolution of the solar PV markets had happened in Kenya and Tanzania, compare. And in that period, between the end of 2000 and coming back to East Africa in 2007, around this time of year, 2007, the market in Tanzania for solar PV had really taken off, so there was quite an interesting story there. And so I spent a year then in East Africa, between Kenya and Tanzania, doing research for the PhD. But what I learned in the process of understanding how the two markets evolved has actually fed into what we're now calling CRIBS. It's been a few years since then, of course, and I had another research project in Kenya, looking at what's happened. I think that research project started in 2012. So there was a 5-6 year sort of extra bit, as it were, to update from the PhD. But then that's then been working with David Ockwell, who Anna-Lee mentioned earlier. And together we then sort of come up with this, that innovation systems are actually a really important development objective to achieve in themselves, because it's from these systems that you can get the other things to happen. And eventually this has turned into this acronym, Climate Relevant Innovation System Builders. Because one thing we noticed about both the Kenyan and the Tanzanian experiences in developing, growing, etc. the market for solar PV is that there were some key institutions involved in coordinating. In effect, they didn't necessarily start out that way to do it, but they, in effect, coordinated many, many projects over the course of a couple of decades, usually very small projects, coordinated those projects, and each one of those projects contributed to building what we might now see as a partial innovation system, at least, around solar PV in both Kenya and Tanzania. And so what we've tried to do is learn from that, from that research, but also looking back at at what's been learned in the field of innovation studies, and particularly the theory about innovation systems. So there's a huge kind of academic literature which has looked at innovation, how it happens, and so on, what kind of conditions are, and so on and so on. So we tried to learn from that literature and from this specific research in East Africa to come to sort of draw out useful insights, important insights for what we're now calling climate relevant innovation system building. So I just wanted to give that as a bit of a background, which is also, I suppose, a kind of claim to some kind of authority, something about the, we didn't do this on the back of an envelope. This is actually it has a heritage of some kind. So what I want to do with this presentation really is to review some of the basic ideas, the main ideas about innovation systems, and then connect that with the possibilities of the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC architecture to see how CRIBS could be used to help actually realise NDCs, join the two elements of the climate convention together, the technology mechanism and the finance mechanism, joining them on the ground in a practical way, and give you some sense of what CRIBS activities might be. I want to then come back to that, I think tomorrow, and get into a bit more detail about activities, and possibly later in the programme as well. But this is just to kind of introduce the basic sort of ideas. And George, you've probably seen this before, so I apologise, it's going to be repetition. So, very briefly I'll look at the context, which we all know anyway. Then I will spend some slides looking at the National System of Innovation, NSI, idea, and then, again, climate change architecture, we all know it, so just very quickly look at that, but then think about how we might use CRIBS to do the implementation of NDCs, summarise from there. So the Paris Agreement, there's new opportunities here. Okay, climate change is a huge threat already, having an effect, serious effect. But it's also a new opportunity to address development objectives, to actually do something about development. Long-standing objective. So you can see it as a threat and an opportunity at the same time. The market mechanisms which so far have come through the climate architecture have not served Africa well at all. And of course the main one there was the CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, as Joanna said earlier, 2-3% of CDM investment went into Africa, compared with, I think I haven't actually looked at it now for a couple of years, but not much changed in the last couple of years. I think it was somewhere in the upper 50% of investment through the CDM into China. And that, while there may be many opportunities to do CDM projects in China, only 2-3% of investment getting into Africa is clearly a problem. And I don't think it's improved very much since the last time I checked the statistics. It might have crept up another a little percentage or something, but I don't think it's got very far. And so, it sort of begs the question as to why. Why would that be the case? Why does the CDM fail in Africa so badly? And one of the arguments, at least, an argument that David and myself and other colleagues would at least present would be that actually if you like, the systems on the ground which can absorb things like CDM projects are weak, fragmented, undeveloped, perhaps even underdeveloped in most African contexts. Especially if you compare with China, where most of this investment is gone. And actually, if you take an innovation system perspective on CDM, you would predict that most investments would go to China and not into Africa. Whereas if you only take a narrow view about the cost of technology, you wouldn't understand why so much has gone to China and so little to Africa. So actually, part of the reason for saying that is that in a sense, hopefully supports the idea that the innovation systems perspective is actually quite a useful one to use to understand, but also that innovation systems are important to build. And in a nutshell, the innovation system is a system that provides the environment for markets and other kinds of delivery mechanisms to work. Okay? Markets emerge from innovation activities. It's not that markets exist in their own right, they emerge out of the activities of various kinds of activities. But for things like CDM projects to succeed, be attracted to a place, to succeed, you need capabilities, you need institutions, you need all kinds of stuff in place already that can take those projects and make them work. Things that you see already in existence in places like China. And then just very quickly in a definitional sense, just to be clear, there are various kinds of, there's the innovation system concept, but then there are sort of versions of it, depending on this sort of, usually a kind of geographical notation, but not entirely, one of them is technological. So there can be sectoral innovation systems, regional innovation systems, the East Africa innovation system you could think of, for example. Sectoral could be agricultural. Technological, so you can think of a wind innovation system or a PV innovation system. And national. And what I'm considering here, which is most appropriate, I think, for the general work of what the CRIBS will be trying to do, is the national innovation system, the national system of innovation. And that's partly because of the way the UNFCCC architecture is set up, so that you've got national entities that are responsible for coordinating kind of actions. But also it's the national level which sets policy, so policies are hugely important in innovation systems, so the national level makes most sense in that way. And the NSI concept is actually now quite old, mostly in the 1980s. Actually the place I work, SPRU, is one of those pioneers in developing this concept. So I've been kind of steeped in that in my training in SPRU since 2004 when I went to do my master's there. But a lot of the scholars and so on who helped to work and develop and evolve this concept have actually passed through SPRU in their training, done their PhDs in SPRU, spread around the world, whatever. But it's not a new concept. It's actually been in evolution since the 80s. But not necessarily taken up that way. In some places, yes, very seriously, in other places, not. So, then thinking about the national system of innovation, and the innovation system referring to this systemic context. And in that context, you get the adoption of the technologies, you get the innovation of technologies, and you get economic development occurring, to some extent, because of those adopted technologies and innovations. The national system then is bounded nationally in terms of understanding the influence of policy on what is possible, what kind of innovation to do, who's who's getting support and incentives and whatever. And the main, as it were, the majority of the actors are located in that nation. But it's not just that you have institutions or actors who are trying to do things, it's also that, as I was talking about earlier, you have relationships between these different actors. So these relationships are important. They can be technical relationships. You know, one firm works with another firm on refining some piece of technology they're working on because that other firm has particular expertise that's useful. It can be market relationships, just exchange. You buy goods and services from another firm. It can be collaborative relationships at policy level, the kind of relationships that you may be developing here, so that you can communicate with each other in the same kind of terms, you understand each other, you trust each other, etc. Those kinds of, there's a whole very, very wide range of different sorts of relationships possible. And the nature and quality of those relationships are important in developing a strong innovation system. And it's out of those things, and then actors kind of solving problems that are most important to them. So if it's a firm, producing mango juice, what are the problems in their production system that they need to solve? And when they are solving, the process of solving those problems is the process of innovation. And a problem solved is an innovation outcome. And I think it is really as simple as that. And that's why the innovation word, as it were, actually has a wide meaning. That essentially it's problem solving and the solutions. Problem solving is innovation, and problem solved is an innovation. And I think once you see it in those terms, then you can start to appreciate that actually it is just actors working together and figuring out how do we get this to work. And that's how you get innovation. Actually achieving it in reality is of course not tricky. But it is also important to note that even though we're focused on the national system, those actors, of course, are connected, can be connected internationally, and technologies flow internationally, and knowledge flows internationally, and so there is this international dimension. It's not an isolated thing. The NSI is not just at the national level. So then think about the elements. What are the elements in an innovation system? And I think this is useful, and hopefully this becomes useful again later in infusing your concept notes with CRIBS thinking, is by thinking what are the main elements of an innovation system. You can start to think how your projects might help to develop, strengthen, create, whatever, these different elements, in what ways and so on, and identify potentially what you're missing. So actors, that's all sorts, anybody, really. Whether it's private companies, universities, research institutes, government departments, NGOs, but also those people who use technology. People, just every day, you think, we use all these technologies, computers and phones, whatever. And, you can use these things as they were intended when they were designed by engineers and marketing departments, whatever. But you can also innovate in how you use them. And I think a simple example, is with mobile phones, where people can communicate without spending money on mobile phones. I'm sure you must have examples of that. That kind of, how would you send a message to somebody without actually sending a text message on a mobile phone? Do you have any examples of that? I've heard of this happening in South Africa. So,
not paying for data?
Yeah, or even the text message.
Oh.
Because if you phone somebody, that's not costing you money until they answer. So you can send a message by phoning someone and then hanging up, and phoning someone and hanging up twice. That means something, okay? You can innovate in how the technology is used in ways that weren't intended when you designed it. Yeah? And save yourself some money. As long as the other person understands the code, that's very important. But I think something like that has emerged in South Africa. So people can communicate without spending money on their phone. But that kind of thing is quite interesting. So that, we're not sort of, as the consumers, we're not limited to the way the technologies are designed. We can actually work from that as well. And kind of introduce new practices, which themselves are innovations. But we can be innovators in that sense as well as the more formal, obvious kind of innovating institutions. I mentioned relations, so how you communicate with each other. A firm communicates with another firm. Let's say you are making solar panels, and you need the material to make the frame for the solar panel. Okay. Now you are a company that buys the frame and puts the modules inside that frame. But you don't make the frame. You need to know where can you buy the frame. What are the specifications of the frame? You need to be able to talk and communicate with that firm to specify what you need. They need to understand what you're talking about. And so that kind of, how you communicate with each other is important. You need to be able to speak a language that's common, not just in the sense that everybody speaks Swahili or English, but the technical terms, how do you understand each other? Those kinds of things are really important. And then the usual, market exchanges, sure, cooperation, collaboration, even competition, of course, is part of this, about competing with others to solve the problem. And all other sorts of relationship kinds, a whole variety of them. Very important. Capabilities, of course, skills and knowledge, and whether that's the individual level or the collective level, like firm having a capability to do something, but we can think of individuals as having capability. But it's not that every firm has all skills and all knowledge. These are distributed around, and so that brings us back to relations, connections. Do you know where to get the right skills and knowledge to help you develop your product, or improve your process, or apply for GCA funding, or whatever it is? Because you can't know everything, be skillful in everything. So these things are distributed around the system, but you need to know where to look. You need to be able to communicate and so on and so on. And then the institutions, the very formal ones, of course, policies, regulations, laws, these things are crucial because they set the rules of the game by which everybody then has to work. Some people, of course, corrupt them and get around them. But there are also informal institutions in the sense of practices, norms, values, which are also important. So you think about culture and how some technologies are not easily accepted because they disrupt the standard cultural practices. So examples I've heard of with biogas, for example, I don't know if anybody's come across this in East Africa, but examples with biogas where it's very difficult to get anybody to use, in some places, difficult to get anybody to use human waste in creating biogas. Nobody wants to touch it.
In Tanzania, there was one project implemented under rural electrification program, and they set up biogas in a school. After some times, people surrounding that school, they refused. They said, we don't want to see this thing here, because even though they were producing clean water, the water which was coming from the west was clean, they said, no, we don't want to see this because think people, they don't really like to
Associate
associate with the manuals.
Yeah. And that, you know, that's difficult then. How do you navigate that kind of cultural practice or belief or whatever it is? Facts aren't usually helpful. You know, you can demonstrate scientifically that this is clean, it's not a problem, but that's not the reason why people are
There is
rejecting.
something background information.
And so it's not, I mean, the standard response is to call this a cultural barrier. Now, personally, I find a problem with that view of it, because what that suggests to me is that you are seeing this as that these people are wrong, their culture is wrong, and I'm going to tell you what the right culture is. So I find the cultural barrier idea a bit problematic there. Instead, I think it might, maybe the way through this is creating a process through which people understand what this is and what it is not, which may or may not be successful. But I think seeing it as a cultural barrier, and all we need to do is educate people, I think that's just not, and it's a bad way to go. But the institution, if you like, that cultural practice is hugely important for whether that technology works. So it's not just the formal institutions we should be thinking about. It's also the informal ones. Yeah. Okay, so now a few diagrams. I don't know if you how you feel about diagrams. This is the part of engineering that has stayed with me. I like diagrams. So I've got a few diagrams to kind of picture innovation, the innovation process, and roughly what an innovation system might actually look like, at least diagrammatically. So this one is about innovation as process. And actually much of the innovation studies literature is focused on the process of innovation, because we want to know how to do it better, how to guide it, how to whatever. So the process is really important. Now, what this diagram does is actually quite an old diagram. This comes from, originally, based on work done in 1986. But it has formed the basis of most people's understanding of the innovation process. And so it's still actually valid in that sense. And what this work done by Klein and Rosenberg, they actually studied innovation in firms, in a lot of different firms, and tried to understand how it happens. And what they found is that within a firm, which is represented primarily through the middle section here up to marketing and sales, is that there are lots and lots of feedback loops. So there are those in a firm doing development, those doing prototype production, those doing manufacturing, those doing marketing and sales. But innovation doesn't necessarily start here on the left with idea generation, but then moves on to development, moves on to product production, to prototype production, to manufacturing, to marketing and sales, and into the market. What's usually called the linear model doesn't necessarily happen like that. That actually innovation might start from the marketplace, and the marketing and salespeople may have done market research and found that actually there's a desire for something, which then feeds back through the system, somewhere up the system, to start the process of trying to address that market want, desire. So innovation doesn't necessarily always start on the left and move to the right. Sometimes it starts on the right and moves to the left. But they also found that innovation doesn't necessarily involve all of these functions. That you can actually have innovations in marketing
together, and that the role of NEMA, would be more in terms of representing the policy link to the process, while acts, that's more of the research perspective. So how you can define that relationship? Maybe it's something that you could clarify. Do you define relationships in terms of research or in terms of, because it's two-way. There is.
Well, let's say, do you, as ACTS, do you go to NAMA and say, look, yeah, we really need to get some research done on finding out about something? You know, I don't know, NAMA gives them money, but let's say, you know, would you support such a thing if we were to go and get funding from somewhere? I mean, would that sort of thing happen, for example?
Or do they ask you for, can you contribute this research or knowledge to our?
Yeah, those are possibilities. There are many other.
Yeah.
But of
And
course,
yes,
the
each
main
relationship
one-
is going to have many
many
kinds of
many,
interactions.
yeah.
So, you know, ACTS doesn't just sit there in ACTS office writing policy reports and putting it on the website. It's out and it's active and it's meeting people and talking different actors in the system in Kenya and across East Africa or elsewhere, whatever. And they're different sorts of relations. So you think, well, with Kurdi, for example, and you're building that project proposal, writing a proposal, which is now about to get going. And who did you interact with in developing that proposal?
Great. We are under education and research. So we interacted with public universities, Kenyatta University and University of Nairobi. We also interacted with the users, that is the SMEs.
Okay.
We interacted with
So they're sort of here,
yes,
suppliers and producers. Yeah.
financial institutions, so
Okay.
that they can create some green credit lines for potential investments that come out of that. And we are also trying to bring on board an NGO that can help have harmonious relationships between industrial parks and the surrounding communities.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's how we are pulling it along.
And how many of those relationships did you already have before you started sort of writing the proposal, putting the proposal together? How many were new interactions? Or what?
The most strong one is based on our mandate, because we are here to support SMEs
Yeah.
through research, demonstration, and development. So we have a strong link with the needs of SMEs. We have integration programs and so on.
And
But
what's
now-
the nature of that link? Do you have a forum where you meet with the SMEs, or do you visit individual SMEs, or gather them together, or how do you? What's the nature of that?
What happens is we have sessions where we are able to determine in a workshop their needs. So their needs inform our research agenda, so that it's demand-driven kind of research, trying to make them productive, competitive.
So you invite them to.
We invite them to a workshop, then we establish their needs. So their needs form the basis of our research agenda, trying to solve what will make them grow and be competitive.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then are there other sort of follow-up?
Then there is a bit of
Contacts.
monitoring.
Do you visit
innovation.
their
Yes, we
premises?
do that. In fact, what I'm directly involved in is promotion of the resource efficiency program. Just trying to ensure that they minimize waste at source. So we always do detailed implant assessments, energy audits, water audits, and so on, just to enable them to account for everything and be productive and efficient.
And do they come to you with questions and
Yes, they do.
requests?
They do a lot of that. They come and say, we have a water problem.
Yeah.
We are running into trouble with NEMA. How can you help us? Can you help us design an effluent treatment plant? But we tell them no. The starting point is that we need to find the root cause of that problem, so that we help you to fix it at a lower cost. So we sell to them the cleaner production approach, so that they minimize the wastewater at source. Then they end up designing and building a much cheaper effluent treatment plant.
So what you're
So it's
describing,
basically
is a set of relationships between, the key people.
Yeah.
It's in here, or maybe it's partially both things, public or
Both directions, yeah.
but it has some relation with other education research
Yes.
organizations.
Normally we also admit students on attachment.
Uh,
So when they come, that becomes a learning window for them.
and do you get universities to do some of the research?
Yes. We partner with the University of Nairobi and Kenyatta University in the doing of execution of implant assessments
Okay.
and development of improvement measures, which we monitor over time.
So some of these links are sort of knowledge flows.
Yeah.
Some of them are relationships,
Yes.
interactions. Some of them are requests. Some other invitations. There's all sorts of different. Although there's these simple arrows connecting things, actually the stuff that's going along the arrows is all sorts of stuff.
That's
Yeah.
true.
And likewise elsewhere. And so basically what you're talking about is part of a national innovation system.
That's true. But as we speak, we have the Science, Technology and Innovation Act of 2013 that creates Kenya National Innovation Agency. It's being set up at the moment.
Oh, we have a team for that.
Yeah, and that's the one that will be at the center of all these things.
Oh.
Yeah.
But the innovation system
Mm.
is not the innovation agency.
No, no.
The innovation system is this.
Yes, what I'm
That's
saying
what they
is
need to be focused on helping to develop and strengthen and so on. Yeah.
one of the mandates in that act is basically to operationalize the triple helix collaboration.
Uh,
Academia,
Yeah.
industry, government, civil society, that kind of thing.
And what about others? I mean, you say it was, you sort of say, oh, yes, actually, in Ethiopia.
Okay. Mine is almost similar with Dr. Kelvin. We are a research institute. I have a direct contact. I'm offered with this diagram. We have a direct contact with the user group with the farm. I don't know how I'm coming to
That makes sense. The user group, you could call them a producer,
producer.
or both, the user group and a producer.
Okay, so we'll have different stakeholders. We can meet with different projects either. Basically, what we have now proposed, small scale food manufacturers will contact with them, and producer farmers, the one who owns the forest. And some other public authorities also owned the farm. Some of the farms are owned by communal, so we need to communicate them. And some government agencies like our minister office and finance agency also, Minister of Finance and Economic Development. And any other suppliers also who are exporting the product to some other place. So these are many stakeholders.
Okay, so that's most of the ones on there.
Yeah,
Almost all of them.
yeah.
And what kinds of links, relationships, interactions?
Formally, we have a regular meeting session with them, especially on 2 times in a year. Is when we review our research results, and for plus for proposal review also. When we develop a proposal, we also need a feedback from those stakeholders. So formally, we will have at least 2 sessions with those stakeholders as a research institute. So through that, we can get there, and plus through technology by other project activities. When we diffuse the technology, we demonstrate some improved technologies. We'll have, I think, a training meeting and through problem identification also. We'll call them for a small meeting, even telephone informally. We'll meet email, some other things we can just get them.
So lots of different forms of communication.
Yeah, yeah,
And different flows again.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to try and put all that on the diagram, but it'd be impossible, as you can see. I'm not going to go around it asking things, but hopefully it realises a little bit more tangibly what this is all about, what it's supposed to mean. And, yeah, it's a very simplified version of a very complicated reality. That's kind of the basic stuff about this. One thing I wanted to underline is about systems. And you know, you might all accept this anyway, so it may not be an issue. But I find this quite a lot in various meetings I've been to, and you hear people talk about what's needed, you know, to make something better or make something work. And what it strikes me as is that people are often superficially accepting the idea of a system, but then when it comes to thinking about the practicalities of doing something, they ignore the idea of the system and focus on particular things. And so, I don't know if this question, well, I do this in my teaching, so it sort of works a bit there, but I don't know if this will work here. But anyway, if you look at a bicycle, and think of a bicycle as a system, let's call it a system for mobility, individual mobility. What's the most important part of the bicycle? Okay, pedal. Anybody else? Same?
The wheels.
The wheels.
Can you say a couple of parts?
The other way to ask the question is,
Yeah.
what could you get rid of from a bicycle and it still functions as a bicycle?
Mudguards.
Yeah,
Mudguards?
You can do
Well, that depends on the weather you're cycling. Yeah, possibly. What can you actually get rid of? And then but it still works.
The
Yeah.
seats.
The saddle. It's called the saddle.
Which one? The crossbar.
But then the one that goes to the seats.
But that's part of the frame that holds the two wheels together, keeps it strong.
Is this a trick question?
Congratulations, this is a trick question. Yeah, it's a system. There is no most important part. It is a system. And incidentally, if we think about it in the real world, actually, we could argue that part of the system is the person who rides the bicycle and the surface on which the bicycle is ridden. Because if you haven't got the right kind of surface, you can't ride the bicycle. And without the rider, the bicycle doesn't do anything. You know, so what's in the system, what's out, there's some argument there. But at least in terms of the mechanical part of the system, it's all necessary. And the reason I want to underline that is because the temptation when we look at an innovation system is to think what we need to do is, you know, provide finance or to build capacity or is an important word there. It's not all of these things, it's one of these things. And this is what tends to happen once we start translating policy, is we get fixated on one part of the system and forget actually there are all these other bits. And we need to be aware. It's not that we necessarily have to be working on everything all the time, but we need to be aware of the strengths and weaknesses around the system and where we can strengthen, where things are fine, where actually maybe that part of the system isn't working that well, and you need to change the way that, that works. The pedals perhaps aren't very well connected, or the wheels are a little bit small, or whatever. But the elements all have to be there for it to work as a system. And then another way, and I have absolutely not tried this before, I was this that was to Emmanuel yesterday, is to think of the football team, a topical one, as a sort of analogy of an innovation system. And what we see all the time in media, of course, is the stars. Yeah, the real spectacular players. I was spectacular. It's Lukaku or Messi or Neymar. The ones they score goals, a lot of celebration and so on. And if you listen, I don't know if you watch football, but if you listen to the pundits when they're talking before a game, they talk about, if Belgium are playing Argentina, it is Lukaku versus Messi. Yeah? Or it's the manager versus the manager. It's not a team versus a team. They talk about individuals. And they sort of highlight the stars. But of course, a football team is a football team. There are 11 players on each team. And there's different formations that they can have of that team. And each of those formations provides that team with particular strengths and weaknesses, which the other team will look to exploit the weaknesses and block the strengths. So, I'm not going to get into the football formations, but 4-4-2, that's the kind of classic old school formation for a football team. The goalkeeper, then 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, 2 forwards. 4-4-2. But there's all kinds of varieties you can come up with. Perhaps when you're watching the World Cup later today, you can look at the formations and think about the strengths and weaknesses of those. But the different formations provide the team with different ways of playing. They suit better certain ways of playing compared with others. But the stars, these guys, are generally either in the midfield or the attackers. And they may have fantastic skills, they score goals, etc. But they wouldn't be able to do it without everybody else in the team. And if you listen to any, there's Rio Ferdinand. Rio Ferdinand? Yeah. Former defender from Manchester United. One of the things he talks about for defence is the relationships between the defenders. They really need to be able to communicate with each other. And you only get that if those defenders work together for game after game after game after game and develop relationships, trust. They can understand how to communicate so that they can work quickly on the field when their team is under attack and maintain a strong defence. Likewise, those communications throughout the team, really important. So, there's kinds of linkages in here that are important, relationships important, skills and capabilities. The skills and capabilities for being a defender are very different to those for a forward. And you need the combination of those things, complementing each other to form the team. And then out of any particular game, if you watch a game, what might be analogous to innovations emerging from the game? If you think about problem solving, and you have the ball, trying to get to the net, trying to get the ball in the net, whether it's you or somebody else in the team, what kind of problems are you facing? Yeah. So you need to get around those defenders, you need to fool those defenders. Somehow you've got to get the ball to somebody to get it in the net. There are various problems, which some you can predict, but others emerge at the moment. And some of the staff layers in particular are very good with their feet, and they produce all kinds of amazing moves, which you could consider innovations. Yeah.
Pretending to be ninjas.
Yeah, that's a very recent trend in innovation in football. Yeah. So it's there's, and of course the goal is the big, the big thing everybody wants at the end. You want to make a profit. So there's various parts to the analogy of. We can talk about strategy a bit there, but hopefully you can see that actually an innovation system is kind of analogous to a team where there's a range of skills and capabilities and relationships, etc. And it's the process of solving problems that produces innovation. I don't know if that works. Anyway, there you go. That's an attempt. And we can develop that a bit. Way too much time. Predicted that. So, where are we in Africa with national systems of innovation? Well, I don't want to dwell on it, but I'm sure for the most part you would agree they're not very strong. They do exist to an extent, as we've heard actually with some of the comments and discussion. But it is also clear that innovation system building is underway, it's happening, and many of you are actually involved in doing it in your daily activities. Sometimes mandated, in effect, to do so. But also you're involved in any case because you're interacting with others in the system and hopefully strengthening and so on and so on. But what we're trying to do with CRIBS then is to really focus and be strategic about it and really try and make it actually more systematic to do it. So the climate change architecture, I'm sure you'll know, technology mechanism, finance mechanism, etc. What we're suggesting is, and I don't know if this is necessarily true anymore, tech and finance mechanisms are not well linked.
It's improving. There are now, there's a closer relationship and is more that being asked on the tech. That hasn't proved that's new because new.
Because it does create an institutional problem when you've got different entities.
Yeah, potentially, yes, absolutely.
So there's this link at the top between the two mechanisms, but then there's this kind of frayed institutional structure beneath it, and how that can be. Anyway, we're not here to sort out the intricacies of institutional arrangements. So thinking about climate change architecture and then how this relates to CRIBS, the basic idea, whether it's the right idea or not, but the basic idea seems obvious to us, is that the nationally determined contributions could link technology and finance, for sure, but also it's where the CRIBS can start to do the linking and actually achieving on the ground. The NDCs, to my knowledge, are not yet detailed, which is fine. That's not criticism, that's the observation. So there's still a need for further strategizing, implementation, plan, projects and so on. But in order to do that, to sort of ground the NDCs in reality and get things to happen, the argument would be that there is a need for a coordinating actor that is actually focused on what is this NDC going to do, how are we going to operationalise it, turn it into stuff on the ground, we're going to achieve development objectives, etc. And we're suggesting that the CRIBS might be a way of doing it. And there's a kind of, while the NDCs are sort of focused on climate change action, mitigation, adaptation, perhaps there is a need for a broader development goal. So that's about responding or avoiding climate change. But what about other development stuff? And actually placing the NDC in a more strategic sense. That maybe national systems of innovation actually are the broader development goal. It's arguable I'm not suggesting it should be done. Could be done. And then linking NDCs to CRIBS to projects which help to build national systems of innovation. So the NDC is kind of policy ambition, CRIBS operationalizing, then turning that into projects that actually do work on the ground, and that work on the ground starts the building or strengthening, whatever it might be, of the NSI. And the NSI then is helping to achieve the development goals, attract projects, develop the capabilities for getting GCF funding or funding from anywhere else, for that matter. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of roughly how the architecture seems to me, where CRIBS can kind of fit in as a sort of what's currently a gap, it seems to me. I don't know if it seems like that to you, but and maybe we need to see more of what CRIBS are about before that makes sense. So I want to say a little bit about what we think a CRIB, individual CRIB would be about. So located nationally, but linked internationally. So, into the UNFCCC architecture, for example. In essence, it's a coordinating institution, but it is a coordinating institution that has strong capabilities and capacity for understanding what exists already. Okay? So, let's say using a kind of national system of innovation understanding, then looking at the issues in the country, being able to analyze those to understand what are the local capacities, capabilities, what are the needs, what needs strengthening, what needs creating. And then to be able to coordinate projects and programs that start to address needs, strengthening capabilities, establish links, develop knowledge, help that knowledge to flow around the system, but also help identify and develop new projects and programs, and of course support the work of the NDA and potentially, because it's so deeply, it could be something involved in NSI development, also be an advisor on NSI strategy. And there could be other things that the CRIBS could do as well. But what we, let's say, see at the moment is that the way national systems are being developed is to put in place institutions that have very specific roles which don't necessarily join together. And maybe the things like the Innovation Agency could do that kind of work, but maybe not. It depends what its remit is. But the CRIBS would be this institution that has a lot of its own capability and capacity, and sort of builds that over time, but is actually connecting ground and sort of national level strategies and ambitions around climate change action. So it does a number of different things. And the projects and programs that the CRIBS identify, help to develop, potentially implement, or maybe not implement, but coordinate. Those projects and programs and projects will be doing the detailed innovation system building. Now, projects need to be relevant to stakeholders. So it's not simply top-down design projects. So CRIBS need to be able to convene stakeholders to develop consensus and understanding about what's needed. They need to be able to facilitate project design, but also talked about politics earlier, political credibility for projects. Technically speaking, you can develop a project, but if it has no political credibility or support, it will not go anywhere. It won't get implemented. You get blocked. Multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, whatever terms you prefer with this stuff. But projects could be and perhaps should be those kinds of things, because that can then draw from all kinds of experiences and all sorts of resources and skills and knowledge, bringing those together for difficult projects, trying to do ambitious things. And the project implementation then, if you've got multiple stakeholders, different perspectives, is you start building networks of actors and those relationships again and understanding. And then you might have several projects going on, but linking projects, understanding how they complement each other or whatever. CRIBS can be doing this kind of work again as part of that coordination, understanding how the projects link, share the learning from these projects, and from that kind of learning and linking, you can influence the design of the new projects that come along. So the projects are always learning from the past, from experience. So if we go back to those elements of the innovation system and think about projects and how projects can contribute to those elements. Actors, multi-stakeholder projects, so engaging with a variety of actors, that's helping to widen the number of actors involved in the innovation system and build those relations. The work of doing the project in itself, learning by doing, is building capabilities. There are other ways, of course, but projects themselves help to develop capabilities. And then those who've worked in those projects, develop those capabilities, are able to bring them into the next project. So there's a legacy of projects. The skills can be used again and further developed. Implementing projects highlights where the difficulties are in institutions, the policies, and so on. Or you discover that nobody wants to buy a gas near their property or whatever. So these things emerge in the doing of projects. So you can learn something about what needs to change in the institutions, or what you're just not going to be able to change, or whatever. And out of all of that action, then you will get technologies and other kinds of innovations emerging, and there'll be, because you're implementing those things in context, what will emerge will be relevance, locally relevant. Whether it's adopting technologies and innovations, adapting them, extending, or potentially creating new ones. But all of this is risky and it's uncertain, so this is where the public sector has to play a role, because the private sector won't take on those risks. So there has to be public money, whether it's national government aim, whether it's donors, whatever, and there are strengths and weaknesses for either of those. But public sector involvement is important. There's a lot of talk these days about private sector. We need the private sector. Yes, we do. But some of that is, there's a risk that we're expecting the private sector to do everything. They're not going to take the risk. Not big risk. So the public needs to be involved. Also, I would argue we need a different view of projects to the standard project view. With projects, they have standard criteria for what is a successful project, which are about time, cost, and quality, and things like that. These kinds of projects need to be, I think, seen more in terms of research and development, so it's much more open-ended. That it's not about in itself, the project doesn't solve the problem, unless we're very lucky. It's about exploring solutions and learning from those. And in the course of doing those things, we're building our networks and relations and capabilities. So standard project criteria need to change. The chances of doing that are pretty slim, but anyway, we need some of that. And we need a long view. We need to be very patient, because this is a long process. If we're really looking to build strong innovation systems, we're looking at decades of work. Hopefully there are wins along the way to keep us motivated, but it's a long process, and we need to be aware of that. We need to realistic about that. It's more or less the end. I'm glad to hear. Okay, so what we've done with the CRIBS idea is we've tried to distill out of what the various activities would be 4 goals as a basic way to think about what the CRIBS would be trying to achieve. That any of the projects and activities should be trying to achieve these 4 goals. So building networks of diverse stakeholders, fostering and sharing learning, promoting the development of consensus, shared visions, and supporting all kinds of experimentation. And actually those things are linked, all 4 are linked. And that if you're trying to develop projects, thinking about in what ways is this project working to achieve this goal or that goal, I think is going to be important. There's much more detail on this stuff, some of which I'll sort of go over in the next day or 2, but that's the sort of basic outline of what hopefully is achieved. So there's a summary there which basically I just said, so I'm going to say it again. And then the last one is just okay. So that was way too long to talk about that.
How, like UK, how have you managed to ensure that public funding is adequate for high-risk ventures so that that translates into commercialization?
Well, the quick answer is in the UK we haven't. And this is actually a kind of anxiety across the country. And the debate goes on and on and on. And although the level of funding is important, and in general the sort of richer countries in the world have spent much more on research and development than the developing countries. The figure itself doesn't tell you everything. Go back to indicators again.
Yeah.
It's what you spend it on. That's what's important. And so you can sort of pump all this money into R&D, which goes into sort of science-based laboratories, let's say, expecting that at the end there'll be all these brand new radical innovations, and almost nothing happens.
That's true.
What happens is that those people who are working in those labs are probably, on a personal level, they want to be able to publish in academic journals that are considered high quality and cutting edge. Is it nature, science, or whatever, yeah? They're not interested in producing things that get out in the market. They're interested in writing papers that get them citations. Primarily, not everybody, in general. So, yes, they may be doing fantastic science, creating very, very important understanding of knowledge. But that is a long, long, long way from stuff that makes a difference to people's lives. Eventually, one day, some of that may be useful, or all of it might be useful to people's lives, but it's a long, long way. And so if you spend all your money on R&D in that way, then you're going to be frustrated about the outputs. If you spend it all on, let's say, sort of gadgets that you can sell in the market, you might get a lot of economic activity, but it may solve no problems whatsoever. Because it's just, it's more Coca-Cola or it's more whatever, and just create problems. So it's not one or the other. And this is where the system is important to understand, and the knowledge system, actually, to go to that project, is important. How does it work? Who does it benefit, and in what ways? And actually, answering those questions turns out to be very hard, very difficult. Most of us, if not all of us, in some way or another, work in research. How many papers have you written? where you think, okay, that's solving a social problem. That paper has done it. I've solved it. Can you point to one paper? So where, you know, how much money to spend on R&D, but more importantly, how to spend it is a huge question, which, you know, has got thousands of researchers across the world involved in trying to answer, and nobody's quite got there yet. So,
Is it a question of how to spend it, or what, or where? I mean, what to spend?
yeah, no,
What,
it's all of those.
what kind of research?
It's all of those. And we, you know, I mean, you're working on these knowledge systems projects as well.
Yeah.
And we just don't know.
Mm.
I don't think we have an answer that we can all feel confident is the right answer. Everybody's got ideas about what sort of, you know, how this stuff should be spent, where it should be spent, what should get the spending, what should drive the process, how it should be measured, what the outcomes should be, etc. Well, you know, there's a lot of debates about all of these things. And I think the only way through it is actually to act, to do stuff, to build the systems and help them evolve largely organically. So we see what's working, and we see what's not working, and we adjust what we do in response to what works and what doesn't work. And that's then why it takes so long. But actually there's a sort of learning by doing in the building process. And meanwhile, policymakers will argue is it 1%, 2%, or spend it in the wrong places, and sometimes the right places. Sometimes things will happen. But the building system, I think, is kind of what we can be certain will eventually produce useful results in building the system. And then the details of those money flows and where they go, etc., may even change in any case. You know. So that's not a very definitive answer, I'm afraid, but that I think is true.
Are there tools for troubleshooting a system? For troubleshooting, knowing failures?
There are attentive ones. There's, I mean, I mentioned in here the technology innovation system idea, and that has its own kind of theory for diagnosing an innovation system around technology.
See what's lacking.
Yeah, using functions,
Yeah.
different versions of the theory, some 5 functions, some 7 functions. But that sort of has, you know, the potential to be used as, I mean, there are problems with theories, but there's certain issues with it. But yeah, it has indicators which are quite sophisticated, some, and it connects these functions together in the system. So it enables you to sort of look at a system and, you know, measure things and say, well, actually, they need more of that, more of this. So it gives some way of assessing the strength of an innovation system around particular technology. And that's, yeah, those tools, like, they're in the literature, they're available. So you can point those out during the 2 weeks.
Recently, this year, I was involved in a consultants work where we did a written review of a research institution in Tanzania. And they were saying, like, now we are not receiving funds the way we used to receive in the past year. And this is because of a shift in the mode of funding, where funding now is more focused on output-based approach, where if you want to apply for funding, you have to have a network with the users of what you want to research on. Like you receive something, and then you output you pass it to another user. You see, I don't know how that model links with this innovation system.
Well, that you can maybe suggest that those outputs are innovations, or at least ideas that are useful to others who want to innovate. Perhaps.
So it is a way of pushing for innovation.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's always problematic because you do, research is means a lot of different things, and it can be very narrow and very instrumental. You can produce a set of policy tools. Research produce policy tools, pass them on to the policymakers, so they can then do their policy making using those tools. Or it's investigating how people understand the meaning of climate change, and what comes out of that research. Policymakers are not interested. They're not going to understand it. It's not going to be directly relevant. But it's important to understand how climate change means something and what meanings it has in different people in different places. So it's still valid research, but it doesn't feed directly as an output. And so that kind of funding mode is problematic because it actually has been stifling that more sort of fundamental research in favour of this very instrumental research, which policy tools are important, but what if you're designing policy that is completely useless to people? So you need to understand both ends, as it were. So, and this is what, that knowledge systems is like there isn't any single thing. It's always actually much more complex. And the danger of focusing on one part means you end up simplifying too much, not really creating a kind of system that will be useful to the majority of people. But it's very hard to be very specific because these things change from context to context. They change over time. And this is why, to my mind, we need to be building systems with capabilities so the system is able to respond itself. The actors in the system can identify actually where we have a problem here. We don't really understand this. We need to do work on this. And that emerges out of the relationships and the understanding in ways that you can't predict. The system has to be strong enough to be able to identify those problems itself and to draw on its skills and knowledge and relations and work out the solution itself. It sounds a bit utopian, but it's that's what I think the system, the strength, the point of the system is. That within it, then you can start identifying. Okay, we look at the mango juice producers. They're trying to do these specific things, but that's so energy efficient, inefficient. We can improve that. We can actually improve the quality of the mango juice. We can, that has an impact on nutrition, and that's we can sort of then be specific.
What is the risk of developing a national innovation system when the capabilities are still very weak? What is the risk that this kind of system can easily collapse? Because the capabilities to make it, because when we talk about national innovation system, we are looking at it as something which should be more effective in terms of addressing the complexity of the problems that we are facing. And central to that is the capability to be able to do things, the competencies and all that. I mean, without the competency, I think this is the point. The innovation system is dead because then there's nothing you can achieve. So look at that in the context of countries where institutions and all, there's still a lot of lack of this capability. What is the potential to have really an effective national innovation system? Or do we start, by first of all building the capabilities within the different, systems or different institutions, and then we move from there to see how best can the capabilities be complementary.
I think I suppose that step one in the argument is actually every country has a national system of innovation, but the range of strengths, if you like, is very, very wide. But they exist, they all exist. There are people with skills and knowledge, capabilities everywhere. Some of those are weak capabilities, some are very strong, some are very innovative, some whatever. But they are there, they're already there. So there is something that exists. Many African countries now, many national institutions which you can sort of see as formal parts of an innovation system as well. They aren't necessarily effective, it's the implementation problem. But the sort of frameworks are there, and some of those institutions, I think, are managing to actually implement things and do things. That's a good example. So I don't think there's any danger in that sense of the NSI collapsing anyway. I think they exist. Somewhere. What I think, let's say the theory of the CRIBS approach is that you say, okay, let's do something around food security. Okay, what we need to do, we have an issue with food security. How are we going to address that issue? What do we currently do around food security? And the reason I say food security and not the supply of maize is because food security then helps you to see it as a system rather than a particular product within particular technology or whatever. But you need to see the system and understand how the parts work together with the strength. And some of that will be maize production, but some of it will be transport, and some of it will be water policy. Some of it will be, the system actually is more complicated than maize production. So thinking food security, what are the issues? And then start to investigate the detail, putting together the detail and seeing, okay, well actually one of the problems with food security is to do more with water and sanitation than it is to do with maize. And then saying, okay, well how do we address the problems of water and sanitation? What do we already do with it? How can we strengthen that? And we find that actually we get, better quality water supplied in the right places for maize production to be successful. And so we can understand the system, we can then focus on where to intervene around a specific technology or practice and work out the project then that actually starts to strengthen the innovation system relevant to food security. Does that make any sense whatsoever? It does.
Yeah. It is, I think it's making. I'm just trying to, get an entry point where we can, people can see, like, this is the entry point in terms of trying to build a national innovation system or maybe other forms of innovation systems. Because this is very critical. The experience I have is that over the years, the aspect of innovation system is very, has received a lot of priority along the policy priorities, but also a number of development practitioners are very passionate about innovation system, and almost everybody think that innovation system can solve most of our problems, which I think is true. It's very useful that we have an innovation system which can allow technology to thrive and be able to make an effective transformation. But I think the point is we need to start moving from seeing that innovation system from a more amorphous perspective and start, making it clear what are the key entry points that you can practically and sort of explicitly, a policy maker in the Ministry of Environment can, explicitly start, pinching and saying this is the entry point for innovation, an innovation system within the context. So the aspect that's why I was bringing the aspect of capability and how that becomes really a major area. How can we build from that in terms of making it the entry point and then branching out to then bring in other elements. That would be
Yeah, but I think that part of the CRIBS process is that work that the policymakers don't want to be bothered about. Okay, here's a system, food security, and then that kind of process of investigating and understanding the elements that make up food security, and then saying, well, actually, what seems to be happening is there's a problem with water supply, and the water supply problem is associated with poor water and sanitation practices or dilapidated technology, whatever it might be. So actually that's what we need to be looking at. So now it's getting specific around particular technologies, and then you start to say, well, okay, what do we already have in this country that can help us sort out our water and sanitation system? Do we have the expertise and capabilities? Which ones do we have? What do we not have? What do we need to get from elsewhere? What kinds of projects could we do which help to rehabilitate this water and sanitation system in ways that actually connect with, in positive ways, with the farming? So you can work out the specifics of the project and identify the capabilities that you need, and the capabilities you have, and the system that already exists, including policies and institutions and so on. So it's a way of kind of starting with a sort of wide lens, a system lens, and then focusing to identify specific technologies, specific capabilities, which can then help you design specific projects. To do that work, but also work out how do you then exploit the fact that you're building new or improving your water and sanitation systems in such a way that you get system benefits, so you build capabilities that stay, you build linkages that continue, relationships that continue, that you are able to learn and inform policy making, so that you come back out to the system and have an impact on that system. Going into the abstract, but I don't know if I'm making any sense whatsoever, but
you have a comment?
Sort of revisit those and then take this system view and think, okay, what is the problem actually that this is trying to solve? Or what is the problem we should be trying to solve? And sort of working that much more clearly and thinking then, what are the various ways of solving that problem? Because it may not be the particular technology or whatever that we so far have, so there might be the same one, there might be different ones, there might be a different technique, there might be a change of practice. I don't know. To identify, okay, this could be a way of then pursuing a project, and in the process of pursuing that project, you are helping to build those relationships, identify the capabilities that are present, that are missing, and gradually sort of drawing a part of the system together, strengthening a part of the system, while pursuing this particular project that you want to implement. You gather people to talk, discuss, understand, working consensus, and so on and so on. And in that process, what you're doing is establishing the practice of a CRIBS. So it's like the first steps of building a CRIBS, which can then, starts to work as a kind of a template for how you would then, look at a different problem, different solutions, but the methodology, the approach, is something that you have developed in that initial thing, which is a CRIB approach. And so what we want you to do with the concept notes that you have is to revisit them and then start to think in a systemic way, and then sort of build the concept and proposal from there. And hopefully in doing that, much of this abstract stuff